Have you ever felt like something was wrong but couldn't figure out what it was? The worst thing is that you can't get rid of this feeling. It's like it stays with you, haunting you at night when you lie in bed and can't sleep. It hadn't gotten to the point of dreaming about me yet, but I knew that if I didn't find an answer soon, it would. This is how I've felt for months now. I don't know why, because everything in our lives was working out just fine. My wife Margaret and I had very successful and fulfilling careers, and yet we were finding a way to put the needs of the family first. Our children were becoming good, respectable teenagers in their own way. Those difficult teenage years, by the grace of God, have so far gone smoothly. I am very proud of the way each of them turned out. Business at the Pig and Whistle restaurant and bar that we owned was doing very well. The locals loved this restaurant for the smoked pork and barbecue ribs with side dishes. Most of the proceeds went into a growing fund to further our children's education after graduation. Although my wife and I argued about this because she wanted a bigger house. For me, however, my first priority was to give our children the best opportunities they could have in life. I thought, why do we need a big house if in 5 to 8 years it will be just us living in it because they will move out one by one? She was against the idea of opening a bar and restaurant from the beginning, but I used the teaching on headship from Scripture to support her. I had a hard time making up my mind to do this because I knew Margaret was adamantly opposed. She fought me as hard as she could. Those were hard months for both of us because they brought us almost to the breaking point. Margaret didn't like me having the last word. After all, she was a woman, and most women look at it differently. But most of the time, she still got her way. Most married men, if you ask them, will admit that wives rule the house. The pastor of our church was the man who got us to finally talk about everything. Margaret was worried that I was jeopardizing everything we had built together. In her opinion, I was jeopardizing her sense of security. To be honest, I didn't think so. In a way, I had to admit that she was right because if things didn't work out, we would be left penniless. The pastor made it clear that we, as a couple, didn't understand each other's emotional needs and intentionally stopped communicating. Neither of us were honest enough with each to share our fears or hopes. This was the fault of both of us. Other than the general manager and chef, most of my staff were church members. It was their support that made the restaurant and bar such a success. The restaurant part of the building closed at 9 p.m. 6 times a week. From the beginning, I refused to have it open on Sundays, and it still does. At first, I didn't realize how much it differentiated our business from others in the market. Since opening, we have become a constant topic of conversation. I succeeded because on Sundays, most restaurants and bars were empty 3/4 of the way through the afternoon. I couldn't imagine myself on a Sunday making others work. By state law, the bar was open from noon to 1 o'clock in the morning. Thursday through Saturday nights, we had a live band, always in country and Western style. On Monday and Wednesday, we set aside a space for an open mic. Thanks to the locals, the place became their haven. Anyone who could play a tune was welcome here. It turned out to be a wise decision on our part. For many, it became a social event that is talked about for weeks. At least 3 times a month, songwriters playing their latest tunes gathered here to get feedback. Tuesday became a cultural night, and we were exposed to music from different cultures from all over the world. Thanks to the university, our small multicultural communities introduced us to their version of what we call classical or folk music once a month, and tickets for these evenings were always booked weeks in advance. As a result, we had a lot of international students because it made them feel closer to home. When their relatives came to visit, they were sure to come to this evening. Many parents told us that it helped their children cope. My wife and I began to attend this evening regularly because it continually introduced us to different cultural traditions. Many of our long-standing friendships were formed through this evening. Over the years, I had accumulated enough knowledge to say hello, welcome, you look nice tonight, and good night in 6 languages. An added plus was that this brought me many new clients to my day job. From that point on, we worked hard on the 2 parts of our lives that our pastor said needed attention, and it brought us closer together in life than ever before. After 5 years, we both agreed that it was the best decision we had made as husband and wife. Of course, over time, she took all the credit. Now everyone thought she made me do it. At church and with the pastor, we were considered a model couple that everyone looked up to as a model of what a family should look like. Our children had no tattoos, no piercings, no wild hairstyles. When they came to Sunday service, they were dressed in style. All three of them pressured me to let them do this. We discussed the topic as a family because my oldest wanted to get a tattoo. I asked them all to get henna tattoos in Mehendi style. I had no idea that it would turn out to be a very difficult experience for our kids. After the tattoo came off after 8 weeks, they never asked for it again. There's nothing like learning through experience that when you do things to your body, you're not going to get what you want. This really bothered me because I couldn't understand why I felt the way I did when it came to my relationship with my loving and supportive wife. The only thing that was glaring was that my wife and I had become emotionally distant from each other, and I couldn't figure out what the cause was. As far as I could tell, there was nothing that was causing the problem. I even redoubled my efforts to put her needs first, but that didn't help either. It got to the point where I was on the verge of a breakdown. Over the past 3 years, I noticed that things were getting worse. We had 18 years of marriage under our belt and things were going very well. We had paid off our mortgage in 10 years and had virtually no debt, and we had 3 healthy children. Jean, our oldest at 16, was a walking miniature version of her mom. Agnes, our second, captured my heart at 15, took after her mother's side of the family and sang in our church choir. Wade, our only son at 14, was going to be one of the biggest, fattest halfbacks you'd ever see when he grew up. Spanking him from the age of 10 was more painful for my arm than his. All 3 were born 18 months apart. Because of his size at birth, Wade caused my wife a lot of internal damage, and as a result, she was unable to have any more children. He weighed 10 pounds 8 ounces at birth and never looked back. It took her a long time to recover emotionally from this. I was so concerned that I suggested she consider adoption, but she quickly dismissed the idea. As soon as our youngest started school, she went and got a job, which she has held ever since. In that time, she has had 3 different bosses. My name is Raymond Burns, and I am in no way related to the Scottish poet, although it was my poems that helped me win my wife's hand in marriage. I'm an agent for State Farm Insurance, and I have my own office with a staff of 3, so I make a very good living. Margaret works for the Chief of Police in Cape and was his executive assistant. Family time was very important to us, but as happens in any family, when the children become teenagers, they have their own interests, thoughts, and personalities. They each demanded more time for their friends and socializing than they did for us. It's hard for any parent to realize that their children no longer need them emotionally as much as they did as children. Still, Margaret and I are adjusting to the changes that come as our children age. Although we had tried to be Christians all our lives, actively practicing our faith, we did not impose our views on others because we felt that our lives spoke for themselves. That Friday, Marge called near the end of the workday to let us know they had something coming up. They had another meeting with the city managers of Jackson about the expansion of the county jail and the new county courthouse. It was to be attended by Peter Reynolds, her supervisor, and my wife. It didn't surprise me because it was quite common. They had been working on this project for the past 3 years, and it was now nearing completion. There were so many last-minute meetings like this that it had become the norm. Since each of the 3 teenagers had their own plans for the evening, I had nothing to do. What I usually did was changed because of spring break. After changing into my work attire, I decided to stop by a restaurant to grab a bite to eat. Peter, my wife, and I knew each other, of course, but that was years ago when the 3 of us went to the same high school. We didn't see him for many years until 4 years ago when he moved away. Marge and I grew up from kids the size of grasshoppers and lived less than 2 blocks from each other. Our fathers worked in the same factory making washers and dryers for retailers. She was interested in boys before I was interested in girls. In high school, we socialized with different people. We each had our own directions in life. I didn't have time for girls. While most guys were chasing them, I spent my free time earning money for the hot car I built for drag racing with my friends once a month. I have to admit, I was consumed by it. My father's father passed on his love of cars and speed to me. When I was growing up, my parents let me spend as much time with him as possible. It started with me handing him the tools he needed and asking him what they were for. By the time I was 10, I was working right next to him as he assembled or repaired hot rods. 4 months before the fall graduation party, Margaret's boyfriend was killed in a drag racing accident. I wasn't there that night because I was working at Taco Bell in their kitchen. I found out through my dad that her dad was furious that she was there that night because she could have been in his car. I realized that it scared him to death. Margaret and I knew each other at the time, but her group and their views didn't match ours. Her friends competed for glamour, reputation, and attention. We, on the other hand, sought to win at top speed. As a result, I put my last hot rod with a 450-cylinder four-barrel engine up for sale and sold it within a week. My father was shocked when he came home from work to find that I had bought the disassembled frame of an old 40 Ford pickup for $200 to rebuild it. I had to haul it from a local farmer's unused field. To be honest, it wasn't in the best condition. It was covered in mud and standing on four wooden planks. As soon as he saw it for the first time, he said, "What farmer saw you as a sucker and sold you this piece of shit?" In my spare time, I repaired her section by section, cutting out rust, replacing fenders, using glue and sheet metal where needed. I then had to sand everything down to a smooth finish. The hardest part was finding parts for the undercarriage. If I couldn't get something right, Grandpa would come over and advise me. He, like me, saw the potential in it. In his growing enthusiasm, he made some of the basic parts I needed for the undercarriage. He became so interested that he would come and photograph its gradual transformation. The following free weekend, I painted it with primer and primer. The following weekend, I painted it twice. Every bit of metal that wasn't chrome was now midnight black inside and out. My grandfather thought the color was perfect. My father looked at it and wondered if it was worth the time and effort. Over Labor Day weekend, with the help of a few of my friends and my mom's good cooking, we were able to install the new motor, hook up the transmission, and do all the wiring. The local upholstery store reupholstered and repaired the seats, and it was ready to go. My grandfather, who was inspecting everything, said, "This baby is taking shape." By the end of September, I had finished the job. Everything that needed rechroming was done and fixed. A friend who worked in advertising repainted the Ford lettering on the back of the truck. We put white tires on it, and on the last Saturday of the month, I got it inspected, licensed, and insured. The first people to see it on the road were my grandparents. I drove it around the village with them before I was allowed to go home. I don't know who enjoyed the ride more, my grandmother or my grandfather. Until the day he died, he occasionally rode it with his wife. We took the truck to rallies and car shows whenever we could. My grandfather loved to keep the conversation going about what I had done under his leadership. Everyone was impressed when we were able to make a photo album with all the pictures from start to finish. To this day, I remember the job offers I received because of my grandfather's proud bragging. I was driving my latest pride and joy home, dropping my grandparents off for the first time, when I saw Margaret struggling to handle the bags she was carrying. I stopped and offered her a ride home. She had gone shopping in town and ended up buying more than she should have. To my surprise, she agreed. On the way to her house, I learned that most of the people she interacted with thought I was stupid. This didn't surprise me as I kept to myself. I had a few close friends. Fixing cars and restoring them kept me occupied and, as my father would say, kept me out of trouble. She asked me why I stopped drag racing. I honestly told her that the death of her boyfriend made me think about changing my life path. I was old enough and it was time to decide what to do with my life. I told her that it was my hot rod that I had sold to finance the restoration of the truck I was now driving. She was surprised to learn that I had already been offered more for it than it was worth. When we pulled up to her parents' house, I got out of the car to help carry the bags of purchased items into the house. I learned that they were all the materials and accessories needed to sew the dress she was going to wear to the prom. It was after she found the perfect material that she decided she had to go. She asked me if I had a pair, and I explained that I wasn't even going to go. Her father was mowing the lawn. He interrupted his work to look at my restored truck. Once Margaret took my bags from me, I went outside to talk to him. "Your father was surprised you stopped hot rodding so suddenly," he said. "But he thought you were a fool to buy it. He didn't think it would do anything. Hell, you proved him wrong. I think it's beautiful. How much did it cost you to restore it?" "Not including labor, about $10,000, I said. "I sold my last hot rod for a little over 14. I've already been offered 12 for this one. I tested it commercially to make sure I didn't miss anything when I put it back together. Once it passed inspection, I insured it." He said, "That was a sensible idea on your part, young man." He asked me to open the hood to look at the engine and was surprised that I hadn't modified it in any way. He had a bunch of questions and I answered them all. He pointed out that modern cars don't have as much protection as this one. Do you think you will sell it in the future? He asked. He asked. No, because the longer I have it, the more its value will increase, I replied. Cars of this generation are becoming increasingly rare. I want to run it in before I stop using it regularly. Keep it, but my daughter Marge was watching us, he said, as we looked under the hood. I laughed and said, I'm not worried, judging by who she's dated in the past, I'm definitely not her type. Maybe, but you're the first young man she's paid attention to since Ralph died, he said. Maybe she's healed and ready to move on with her life again. Closing everything behind me, I opened the driver's door, about to drive home. But I heard Margaret say, Raymond, please don't go. I need to talk to you. I saw her coming down the stairs, and for the first time in my life, I saw her as a young woman, and not just a neighborhood boy. Margaret was a natural beauty. Her height was about 5 feet 7 inches. Her curves were strong and well-defined. She had a healthy look that I found attractive. Her reddish-brown hair was gathered into a ponytail. The fact that she wasn't wearing makeup like most of the girls in the crowd was an added plus for me. On the other hand, at 5 feet 10 inches tall, I had a well-defined upper chest, but I was like skin and bones at the bottom. My folks said I always had a lumpy chest, whatever that meant. That is, I was broad at the top but narrow at the bottom. My naturally curly brown hair, the longer it got, the more it looked like a styled afro. Now I really needed a haircut. Growing up, my mom always said that in the winter I looked bulky and big. In the summer without a shirt, I looked like one of the starving children from Africa. In my 18 years, when I took my shirt off, if I pulled my stomach in, you could still see the outline of my ribcage. Margaret walked with a confidence that said she knew who she was and what she wanted. The white t-shirt she was wearing emphasized the softness of her figure but did not expose the shape and size of her breasts. Graduation is in 6 weeks, she said. The first thing I need to know is, can you dance? Not really, I answered honestly. Maybe I can do a square dance where I'm led, but nothing more than that. Why not? She asked. I never found a man worth doing it for, I explained, not knowing what else to say. If I wanted to start dancing, it would only be because I wanted to please the girl I was dating. Then we'd have to practice a lot for the next 6 weeks, she said. And why would we do that? I asked. Because you're taking me to prom, she laughed. Are you serious? I asked. She took my hand in hers and said, Yes, unless we find that you are unlearnable. It was fun learning to dance. When the church had a social before the prom, I went to check out what I had learned. In the huge basement of the church, my dancing got so much better that it caught my attention. 2 girls asked me if I had a date to the prom, in the presence of guys who were interested in them. Margaret wasn't able to attend the prom, but she had definitely heard about it. Everyone asked who was giving me lessons, and I told them. The next week at school, many of the boys watching me asked Margaret if she would give lessons to them as well. She answered them, If Raymond will allow it, will I allow it? At one look at me, they decided it would be better to take lessons elsewhere, for I had already been weightlifting for years. The coach in high school tried for years to get me on the soccer team, but it just wasn't my thing. I could play most sports, but I wasn't passionate about them. At prom, I saw Margaret in a dress for the first time. It was such a memorable moment that I can still close my eyes and mentally visualize the image. The light blue strapless dress skimmed her figure, emphasizing the natural beauty of her body in all its splendor. Her cleavage was half hidden, but left no doubt that there was plenty of it. I still to this day believe that it was at that moment that I realized I had fallen in love with her. It was then that I first wondered why she was with someone like me. There was a style and grace about her that I had never noticed before. That night couldn't have gone any better. Even though we weren't king and queen, we were treated as if we were royalty. Everyone was jealous of my old restored 40s Ford. If another girl asked me to dance, I made sure Margaret didn't object. When a guy asked her out, she did the same in reverse. One of the attendants told us it was nice to see such a young couple treating each other with such respect. The woman said, You two have something special. Don't let the envy of others ruin it. Toward the end of the school year, we broke up over something I happened to see. Peter Reynolds, the school's quarterback, was hugging her. I was with a group of friends when we caught them. I stood and watched them from across the soccer field as they exchanged a very intimate kiss. When one of the girls asked me what I was thinking, I replied, "There goes my ex-girlfriend voluntarily going from one man to another." That evening, I went to her parents and in their presence told Margaret who I was with and what we had all seen. When I asked her how long our relationship had lasted, she said nothing. I said, "Thank you for wasting my time. I won't bother you again." She cried and looked upset, but I didn't believe it because if she felt that way, she wouldn't have flirted with him. From then on, if I saw her walking down the street in my direction, I crossed the street to avoid her. Her father later told my dad that even they didn't know what she was doing behind my back. Dad told him that I didn't say much, but he knew I was hurting. I got home, changed into my blue jeans, and headed to our restaurant to grab a bite to eat. Afterward, I planned to sit at the bar for an hour or two. I was sitting there enjoying my meal when Peter's wife Tammy walked into the restaurant. When I first noticed her, she gave me the impression of a woman with a lot on her mind. This piqued my interest because she headed straight toward me. When she approached my table, I stood up. Tammy wasn't a local girl. She'd met Peter when he was in law enforcement training. Her parents belonged to an ancient lineage. I firmly believe that Peter had married her because of that fact. He left Margaret for her. Tammy was still a very beautiful woman with black hair, dark blue crystal eyes, and a smile that could catch anyone's attention. She had a great figure that most men would want to hug on a regular basis. I always thought Peter cheated on her when she married him. Peter came back to town 4 years ago from the other end of the state when our old police chief retired. When he applied for the position, they liked that he was from the area. When he was screened and interviewed, they made an agreement that brought him back home. "Tammy, long time no see," I said. "You look beautiful. How are your kids doing?" "The kids are growing up just like yours," Tammy replied. "I'm here to discuss Peter and Margaret and what we're going to do about it." "There's not much we can do about it," I said, "until the construction is done. Not with Jackson's progressive mayor, who tries to control everything that gets done. He takes the simple, complicates it, and seems to be succeeding. In doing so, the things that really matter, he continually ignores." "Is that what Margaret told you about?" Tammy asked. "Because if that's true, then shouldn't Jackson Carter, who is sitting with his wife on his left, have been at the meeting?" I looked around and saw them. My face must have expressed shock and surprise. Tammy was right. He was a member of the Jackson City Council. "I'm sorry, I thought you knew about Peter and Margaret's relationship," Tammy said. "Their affair has been going on for about 18 months now." When you first hear a statement like that from someone you hardly know, it makes you wonder and question his motives. As far as I could tell, Tammy had none. As a registered nurse, she worked in a nursing home from 3 in the afternoon until 11. I took her comment with a grain of salt. "I have a prenup," she said. "My concern is that if I go any further, how much damage will it do to you?" "I'm not the type to take a man's word on serious matters," I said. "I should be able to prove it to myself. I thought so," Tammy said, holding out a piece of paper to me. "This is the address of the house they're living in now. It belongs to a guy who's serving his 7th sentence in prison. Peter promised him a reduced sentence so he could use it. The idiot doesn't know there's nothing Peter can do." "How did you get it?" I asked. "I took a permanent day off and used a rental car to follow your wife," she said. "Peter gave me the same excuse last time. Then I went to the village archives to get his name and checked the records to find everything I could about him, using my husband's connections at the police station." "I'll go and check it out for myself," I said. "Let's exchange phone numbers and agree to text each other to see if it's safe to talk. If it turns out you're right, we'll have something to talk about." After saying goodbye to each other, I paid the bill and headed for the exit. I walked to the car and said, "Google the road to 475 Old Cape Road," which ran between Cape and Jackson. It was a 10-minute drive in the dark of night. I pulled off to the side of the road. In the light of the lantern on the telephone pole in the parking lot, I could clearly see my wife's car and a police car parked side by side. All I had to do was sit and wait to see who would be behind the wheel. While I waited, I watched Hell's Kitchen on Pluto TV on my cell phone for 4 hours. Finally, the lovers walked out to their cars. Before leaving, they shared a deep, passionate kiss. There was no doubt about it. My baby girl was in the arms of another man. She had willingly passed from one to the other. It was sad because I had been in the same situation with them before. Now I knew the real reason for Peter Reynolds' return, and it made me terribly angry. When I saw them together, I realized I was right. Peter had married Tammy for her family's money. I started the car electrically so it wouldn't make a sound and drove off without turning on the headlights. Under the glow of the interior lights, I called Tammy's cell phone. She answered immediately. "Give me a month, please," I begged, "so I can put them both to sleep so they won't even realize what happened to them." "What are you going to do, Ray?" Tammy asked. "Put them in a hole so deep," I replied, "that it will take them years to dig it out." Now I knew why we had drifted apart emotionally. Her mind, heart, and eyes were preoccupied with something else. By the time I got home, I had already begun to formulate a plan to get even before I struck the blow that would bring me victory. The woman I was married to had turned her back on her family and given her body, mind, and soul to another. This is the second time I have watched my child voluntarily leave one for another. As a result, neither of them will ever have another chance again. I got home 10 minutes earlier than my wife. Luckily, all three of our kids were at sleepovers. I quickly undressed, got under the sheets, and turned on the cable news. I knew that since I was watching the news, Margaret wouldn't come to bed until I was asleep. It wasn't long before she walked into our bedroom, heading for the shower as usual. I slowly pretended to fall asleep. Soon she joined me, smelling as fresh as she always did when she went to bed. Taking the remote, she turned on Rote Murder and fell asleep. 2 hours later, I went downstairs and found her work keys at the bottom of her purse. On a sheet of freezer paper, I spread out Play-Doh and made casts of them. By the time I returned to retrieve them from the basement, they had to be dry and hard. Making the copies was easy, and I knew who to contact to make sure everything went smoothly. The next step was to meet with the man at the prison to see if he could grant me access to his house. That was the best I could do, because he was as fed up with Peter Reynolds and his impossible promises as I was. Fortunately, he had connections inside and out to push my plans even further. It turned out to be the smartest move I ever made. I also sold him a new home insurance policy. 4 weekends later. The smartest thing you can do when faced with a situation you know you can't win is to stay calm, relax, and do nothing. Pretend that you don't care because that means you don't believe them. They will soon start to realize that you don't care about the crap you hear from them. This tends to piss off the person you're talking to. It throws them off balance. They sweat, they tense up, realizing nothing but their own frustration. They really don't like your blank expression because it implies that you have no idea what you're talking about. That's what I've been doing for the last 4 hours. 2 detectives had been trying to question me about a man they said had been having fun with my wife behind my back for months. By this point, I had decided that they had gotten to the point where they thought I was a complete idiot. They so delicately hinted that I should have known about their relationship, even though by now they might have started to think I was simple-minded. When that didn't work, they tried acting aggressively. The 2 detectives showed me pictures of their secret love nest and explained that the meetings they had supposedly attended for months had not actually happened. They detailed how they thought I had guessed this and why. As a result, they decided that I must have something to do with their favorite police chief, Peter Reynolds. They even brought up the fact that he had already successfully instigated our breakup once before. I figured Margaret must have told them all her dirty secrets. Now they had my attention because I couldn't wait to find out what these knuckleheads were going to spew at me, trying to exhaust me to the point where I would start to open up. I sat down, stopped slouching, and started listening intently. I showed them facial reactions expressing surprise, awe, sadness, and sometimes remorse. The days spent in hotspots were taking their toll. In those days, I learned how to make a poker face. Looking at my opponents, I always had to hide my thoughts and feelings. There's no way you're going to let the idiot you're racing against gain a physiological advantage. I loved the way they did things. If only they knew I thought they were getting stupider and treated them accordingly. The only game they had left to play was bad cop, good cop against me. 2 days ago, my loving wife went to their special place and found her lover missing. She found a police uniform, wallet, gun, holster, watch, and ring lying in a pile of dried blood. In a panic, she called the police, reporting a possible crime scene, and left the house without touching anything to preserve the evidence. Little did she realize that she would have to explain why she was here. The small situation she found herself in quickly turned into a very serious one, due to the identity of the man whose personal belongings lay in a pile of red dried blood. In addition, his police cruiser was parked right next to her car. Because of this, she had to reveal her 19-month affair with her supervisor, a respected police chief. When the detectives investigating the situation asked who might have known about their relationship, she said she had no idea. In desperation, after being questioned again, she said, "The last person I would suspect would be my husband Raymond, because on Fridays and Saturdays, he is always at work in our bar." Only later did she realize that I was working on a special project at the request of our pastor, so I hadn't been at the bar in months. When I got home that evening, she was in tears. I tried to explain to my wife what was bothering her and our children. She explained that what she was going through was just an emotional experience that comes with change. What puzzled investigators was that his gun had not even been fired. There were no signs of an apparent struggle. All that was left were 2 wine glasses, a dozen red roses in a box, and 2 bottles of wine in the refrigerator. It looked like it had been a romantic evening for these two. It didn't take the cops long to realize that I wasn't where my wife thought I was on those 2 nights, and hadn't been for weeks. The 2 detectives decided that I had no alibi. For some reason, no one could find me. In their opinion, because of what they knew, I was automatically the prime suspect. That Sunday after the morning service, just as we were finishing talking with the pastor, 2 detectives came up to take me in for questioning. It was very embarrassing to be in front of them in such a public place. I was well aware that they were in a complete panic. If Peter Reynolds was still alive, he certainly needed medical attention. His life could have been in danger. Our 3 children were in complete turmoil. I could tell by the look on Margaret's face that she hadn't expected this. I played dumb to give the impression that I had no idea why they wanted to talk to me. I refused to go, said I was going home, and headed for my car. They arrested me for aiding and abetting a possible murder. They put my hands behind my back and handcuffed me, then started to lead me to their car. My 3 children began to cry. Both of our parents stood in shock. As I was being led away, I turned to my wife and said in a cold voice, "What are you accusing me of, Margaret?" Her face turned white. Our parents witnessed all of this, as did members of our parish. I lied about what was happening right at her feet, knowing the gossip it would cause. As I was being ushered into the back seat of the police cruiser, I turned, looked at my wife, and smiled. I knew that in half an hour everyone would think my wife was behind my arrest. My wife must have turned against me, but why? What had she said about me that could have led to this development? On Friday night, 2 of my Chinese brothers from our small organization set up by the landowner loaded him in an open crate onto an empty truck. Unfortunately, he didn't know that they slipped a good dose of sleeping pills into a few drinks after work, enough to last several hours, and then put him on a chloroform drip that would keep him unconscious for the next few days. If they used the right doses, he should wake up in about half an hour. My job was to be the idiot the police focused on. The longer I stayed with them, the better. So far, things were going much better than planned. If you pushed the crate, it would collapse, leaving him free and naked. The only problem was that it could go anywhere. We were kind enough to leave him a nice orange robe he could fit into, the kind worn by inmates in the county jail. It even had a jail designation on the pocket. It belonged to the Cape Girardeau County Jail. I figured his loud screams wouldn't attract enough attention to be discovered before the next truck stop. By then, he wouldn't be able to identify himself without any evidence. If we hadn't given him enough food for his size and weight, he might already be awake. So, after 4 hours of playing Death and the Fool, I finally spoke up, "Can I have a cup of strong black tea?" They took that as a sign of progress. I began to open up to them. One of the detectives left the room and was gone for about 15 minutes. His partner inquired as to why he was taking so long. He returned with a white face and meek demeanor. The junior detective realized something had changed. "Mr. Burns, we owe you an apology," the senior detective said. "It seems the chief had too much alcohol and got himself into a situation he shouldn't have been in. When he was found, he was hung over and sitting in an empty truck near the border in Sumas, Washington, heading for Canada. He was wearing a stolen orange jumpsuit. We now have his own words that it was his own credit. He said he couldn't explain anything because his mind was clouded. It must have been one hell of a binge. How long did you hide the fact that he was just drunk? Does he often have these periods of clouded judgment?" "Looks like I'm going to have a cup of tea," I said. Could one of you direct me to the nearest place where I can buy it? I need to think this through and put it all on paper before I contact a lawyer for the civil suit I'm going to file against the police department for false arrest. The expression on the faces of the two detectives turned white. I spoke knowledgeably and authoritatively. Now they knew I wasn't very impressed with what had happened. Ask yourself why the chief needed an alibi for the weekend that couldn't be broken. Why did my better half, his admitted mistress, if you believe what you've been telling me for the last 4 hours, want to arrest me? I asked, looking directly at them. Perhaps if you look at them as closely as you look at me, you will find that they both seem to be defending themselves. Are you saying we were set up on purpose? The younger detective asked. No, I just wanted to know why they decided I needed an alibi with you before today. Now, if you could please return my cell phone, I said. I'd like to get out of here and head to the restaurant for a cup of black tea since you two refused to bring it to me. We were almost to the front door when the porter said, Mr. Burns, the silent alarm at the Pig and Whistle went off a little over 2 hours ago, and we've already sent officers there to inspect the scene. Looks like whoever broke in had a key and a combo to the safe. Damn it, I said. As of 11 o'clock this evening, there was over $20,000 in cash in the safe. Both detectives looked at me in utter shock when I said, I guess I now know why I was wanted here. With those words, I walked out the front door and headed towards my restaurant and bar. I had to see what damage the robbers had done. I had walked about half a block when a handsome young policeman offered me a ride. As I climbed into the passenger seat, he informed me that he had orders to take me somewhere. In his presence, I called Margaret, my soon-to-be ex-wife. She answered on the first ring. I knew he had orders to videotape the whole thing. The detectives finally let me go, dropping all charges, I said. It seems Peter Reynolds, your lover, as they explained to me, is alive and well. I can imagine your relief. From what I've learned, I have a question as to whether you were stalking Peter to pay Tammy back for stealing him away from you. The police are taking me to the Pig and Whistle because it was broken into today while I was at the police station. Could it be that you and your longtime lover planned this whole thing to undermine my credibility with my impending divorce? I hung up the phone and said, Imagine that. She ended the call before I even had a chance to respond. Why would she do that if she didn't want to answer my questions? It makes me wonder what else she is hiding. I called my parents, and when my dad answered, I said, Dad, could you and Mom do me a favor? After Dad agreed, I said, Call Margaret and let her know you're on your way to get my clothes and the keys to my Ford truck. Then bring them both to the Pig and Whistle. I'm heading there with the police. All charges against me are dropped, so I'm going to sue them for false arrest and slander. It looks like I was set up on purpose by someone who knows the inner workings of the police department. What the hell is going on, Ray? My father asked. Oh, didn't you know? I said. The police arrested me because they suspected I destroyed my wife's lover, Peter Reynolds, the chief of police. Hell, I didn't even know about the affair until the detectives uncovered it when they questioned me about it. I looked at the young cop's face and saw that it was pure white. I knew he believed what he had heard. I smiled because no one knew what magic could come from a few key fingerprints on a playtest and agreeing to pay cash for property taxes on behalf of the police chief. For some reason, the police officer stopped on his way to my bar to make sure I got the biggest hot black tea he could buy. During the trip, the pastor of our church and a minor child member of our church showed up at the police station to provide me with an alibi. Detectives learned that I had been tutoring the child for several months as a member of the Big Brother organization. Parishioners were providing the money needed for a project I was working on. My young man and I spent Fridays and Saturdays working on a car we were restoring. The reason we kept it a secret was because it was to be a surprise for his single mother whose birthday was approaching. It was to be the first car she owned as a single mom. Things worked out just fine for the police detective. They saw their future job fly out the window because of how incompetent the police department looked. The pastor brought a camera crew with him. They had to explain everything. It was going to make the 10 o'clock news and be published in the paper on Monday. When I got there, I found that the back door was being used for entry. I told the officer that this indicated that the man knew a scheme to bypass the security system. It must have been an inside job. Only 2 managers have keys to the office, me and my wife. The cops made a mess looking for fingerprints. I reminded them that my seat was already taken when they checked me in and took pictures. I was treated with the utmost respect. They were just about finished when I asked them if they knew of a locksmith who could come and pick the locks on Sunday for lunch. Fortunately, They did know, so I called him. It would be expensive, but they all agreed it was the best way to ensure security. I pointed out that a bag of overnight deposit money was missing from the bank. With their permission, I pulled out my bank deposit book and used the printer to make a copy of it. It showed that I had deposited 10 checks. Does it matter? I asked. Only if we find them where they shouldn't be? What we didn't know was that later that week, those 10 checks would be found in a locked drawer in the police chief's office at the station. The cash was never found. Mom and Dad arrived just as the locksmith came in. He rekeyed 5 locks and gave me the 4 copies I needed. When he left, we sat and talked while having a drink at the bar. They were shocked to learn how I had found out about my wife's infidelity this afternoon. My father decided he should call Margaret's father and let him know. That's when I learned that this wasn't the first time Peter Reynolds had interfered with my wife and me. This time would be the last. My mom let me stay with them until I got it sorted out. As soon as my kids found out I was released, they called me. I explained to each one individually what I had learned at the police station and told them I would stay with my grandparents for the time being. They were shocked to learn that their mother had been in adultery for so long. When my parents left, I locked the door and sat in my pride and joy, which I had owned for over 18 years. It was still in perfect condition, and I often drove it to car shows and get-togethers. With privacy, I sent Tammy a text. "You can talk." A few seconds passed before my cell phone rang. "Raymond, are you okay?" Tammy asked. "I'm fine," I replied. "It was a pretty stressful day when I first found out about my wife and your husband cheating on me. How did you deal with that? I assume you found out about it on Friday night." "It was shocking," she replied. "Can we get together and talk about it?" "I was just about to go to Cracker Barrel to get something to eat," I said. "If you want, you can join me there." "On the way," Tammy said. "I'll be waiting for you in their retail section." She was there when I arrived. We must have looked like an odd couple, she in blue jeans and me in a church suit. We asked the hostess to give us a place where we could have some privacy. Fortunately, the place wasn't crowded at this time of day. After ordering what we wanted, we started talking quietly. I was in complete shock when the detectives showed up at my work on Friday night to report what they had discovered, Tammy says. Then I remembered that you asked me to give you 4 weeks. I told the officers that deep down I didn't believe he was dead, Tammy says. Then they asked me if I knew about Peter's affair. "What affair?" I replied. Then they had to explain how they knew about it. "I pretended to be as shocked as you are," I said. "I had no idea I would be arrested so publicly." I left the detectives with a bunch of questions that will require them to investigate further. "The beauty of it is that your wife had to testify against both of them," Tammy said. "It saved us a lot of foolishness." "Be prepared for the detectives to ask you if your husband has a drinking problem," I said. "I was under the impression that he did." "That's easy to deal with," Tammy said. "I'll just say I believe it, but Peter is still in denial." "I'm going to see Dale Britton tomorrow to see if he'll represent me," I said. "I'm going to escalate things further by filing a civil suit against the city police department, your husband, and of course your divorce from your wife. I'm going to have my attorney post a legal notice," she said, "that I will not be responsible for any of his debts from now on." "Tammy," I said, "there's one more thing you should know. In my last year of high school, when Margaret and I were dating, we broke up because your husband moved in with Margaret behind my back. He left her for you, just like she left me. It made me wonder if Margaret went after Peter to even the score." This revelation about our history explained a lot in her eyes. I realized that Margaret had a new enemy for life. "When did you and Margaret reunite?" she asked. "About 8 months after the announcement of your wedding," I said, was published in the local paper. Margaret Burns sat there trying to understand how things could have gone so wrong so quickly. It had come as a complete shock to her when the police had arrested her husband just as they were preparing for their usual Sunday dinner. The coldness in Ray's voice when he said, "What are you accusing me of, Margaret?" And that said it all. Immediately, a host of questions arose. Unfortunately, none of them she could answer because of the need to keep her behavior a secret. Now both sides of their family knew about her affair. Her own 3 children were crying upstairs. The way Ray found out about it should have been a disaster for him. But here was the puzzling part. If Peter Reynolds was alive, why hadn't he contacted her? Each of their children had separately come to tell her that they'd spoken to their father after his parents had come for his personal belongings. That's when she found out that her husband had told them he'd been arrested because he'd been accused of killing his wife's lover before he'd been found alive. Ray explained that someone had played a very serious joke on him, taken to the extreme. When asked why, he explained, "Someone wanted the long-standing behavior of your mother and her lover to become public. I think it was someone he helped put away. I hope they get the state to investigate this whole situation because now it looks like the credibility of the Cape City Police Department has been called into question." Ray indirectly, directly, and openly accused them of being behind all of this because of their jobs. His arrest, the break-in of their restaurant, and the destruction of their two marriages began to look like it was one grand plan. What Margaret didn't know was that the children had held a family meeting in one of the bedrooms and jointly decided that they would go to live with their father after the divorce. Margaret was already regretting getting involved with Peter after he left her. She knew he loved people to the extreme. 2 years later at their father's annual company picnic, Ray and she spoke to each other again. It wasn't until weeks after the picnic that she learned from her friends how much she had hurt him. She hadn't realized that he had fallen head over heels in love with her. At the time, he was just a friend to her. Many people said it changed him forever, and they were right. The Raymond she met that day was a stranger to her. He was a man who kept to himself and didn't say too much. There was a sense of distance and coldness about him that she hadn't noticed before. Though he walked tall and proud, he walked alone. They had exchanged only a few words that first day, and he had refused to discuss what he was doing in life. His earlier openness was gone. Her parents later learned that he had not dated anyone after her. A car accident a few months later on Highway 55 changed everything. Her tire burst at speed, causing her to lose control and flip the car several times. She began to burn. Ray, who was driving in the opposite direction, pulled over to the side of the road. Through the smoke, he made his way to the front seat, undid her seatbelt buckle, and pulled her out. Until she was in danger, he didn't even know it was her. He held her until rescuers arrived and then called her parents to let them know what had happened. She was semi-conscious but heard him tell her he still loved her and asked her to hang on. It took her over a week to recover, and when he wasn't working, he was there for her. Her idea of the love she was looking for changed, and she began to see Ray in a different light. 8 months later, she became his fiancée. Over time, she grew to love him, but she was never in love with him the way he was with her. All was well until Peter Reynolds came into her life, looking better than ever. In time, he won her over, and they became lovers. Never before had any man aroused such passion and emotion in her as Peter did. Peter had given her the spark and thrill of young love for the first time. She felt like a young girl in love again. They both felt the attraction as soon as he took his seat. Soon they could no longer resist the desire they felt for each other. Now both families were broken. Ray, her husband, was suffering to the extreme, and sadly she knew better than anyone that he didn't deserve it. Raymond had been a good husband and provider throughout their marriage. She was still immersed in her thoughts when her oldest son entered the room. "Mom, the three of us were talking upstairs," Jean said firmly. "We decided that since I'm the oldest, I should tell you that after the divorce we're going to go live with Daddy. That way you'll have the quality of life you seem to want to have with Mr. Reynolds." Margaret just burst into tears. Her own behavior had cost her everything, and the only one she could blame was herself. Her eldest daughter, a miniature replica of herself, expressed it perfectly by pointing out what her own behavior said. "I was at the Pig and Whistle early in the morning. The staff had to be let in. Those who had to come in this early were watching the 4 a.m. news. Everyone was dealing with the information that had been revealed. This led me to announce that no matter what, the Pig and Whistle would stay open. I gave the restaurant manager new keys and a new combo for the safe. I gave her a set for the bar manager and told her to give him the combo for the safe. She was surprised that I didn't suspect the staff. She had one of the staff members fingerprint and do a general cleaning of the back room and my office. For a weekday, this was the most common opening. While I waited for breakfast to be served, I got the impression that many people come here out of their own curiosity. Afterwards, I went to work as usual. My coworkers were very supportive of me and what I was facing. I called Dale Britton's office and made an appointment for 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I spent the morning answering phone calls and dealing with the little things that came up. As soon as I was in his office, I knew he would take the case. Dale never liked the new police chief who came in after he left. Dale thought Peter Reynolds was an arrogant, narcissistic asshole who had all the right skills for the job, but was always looking for a way to get ahead. As soon as Margaret arrived at the office, two detectives went into her office to talk to her. They wanted to know if her husband was going to sue. She said, "He really has no choice. You ruined his reputation by pouncing on him with your fists. You exposed Peter and my affair with him and, as a result, ruined his life as he knew it. You seem to be completely oblivious to what Peter was doing after he left work on Friday. If it was a setup, as my husband believes, then so be it," Margaret said. "You have to find out who and why? I'm asking where Peter was found?" "In the back of a truck near the border in a town in Washington state," the senior detective replied. Asked if Peter was intoxicated or unconscious. "Comparing him to my husband, I would say his drinking may be excessive, but I have never seen him drunk," Margaret explained. "That's a question that should be asked of his wife." At lunchtime, the news reported that the mayor of the town had asked state representatives to come and look into the situation. 6 days later, that Sunday, the pastor called the single mom and handed her the keys to her car after the service. It wasn't brand new, but it was now in perfect condition and was fully insured. I watched as he talked about how her 10-year-old son and I had worked together at his house to get the car in that condition. Her emotional response and pure tears of joy couldn't help but move me. My children saw my Ford truck as soon as they arrived and joined me to sit with me during the service. I was surprised to see that Margaret didn't show up. It was the first service she had missed in months. Then it dawned on me that she wouldn't have been able to stand the stares or whispers behind her back. My 3 children traveled 2 miles to get here. I couldn't help but be proud of them. 2 daughters proudly held my hand, and a single mom praised me over and over again for the knowledge and time I gave to her son. "I've seen my son change over the past few months," she says. "Out of the blue, he started fixing things around the house while I could afford to buy what we needed. I knew Brother Burns was mentoring him, but I didn't realize how much until the neighbors started paying him to help every chance they got. Instead of keeping the money for himself, he put it in our fund jar. For the first time in many years, we have no bills or debt, except for a small mortgage on a house. I don't think Brother Burns knows how much he has improved our lives. My son finally bought us a computer and is using it to repair and fix small appliances." After that, she came over and gave me a big hug, thanking me again. As soon as she finished, my father and I exchanged keys, and I was able to take the kids to lunch and be alone with them. I asked Agnes to let their mother know what we were doing so she wouldn't worry. The last few weeks of Peter and Margaret's lives were dissected, as if under a microscope. One of the questions they were trying to answer was how 9 checks from the Pig and Whistle bank deposit had ended up in a locked drawer to which only Peter had the key. Another question was where the money came from to pay the property taxes they were scheming with. They found out that the property taxes had been updated, and on Wednesday of this week the taxes for this year were paid. A full day after Peter's return in cash. City officials Peter Reynolds and Margaret Burns received the summons on Friday. Dale Britton acted quickly and efficiently. He directed that the suit against the city be served on the mayor himself. Amazingly, an envelope with a bunch of keys was delivered to the mayor's office the same day. The 2 detectives soon discovered that they were keys to the police station and a copy of the old master key to the Pig and Whistle. They were now certain that it was definitely the inside work of someone in the police force because Margaret's desk stood outside Peter's office and was visible to anyone in the large open room. Of course, they had to turn the find over to the state authorities who were now investigating. It was obvious that anyone could have copied the keys, for Margaret never locked her purse, and it always lay beside her on the desk. If she had absented herself on some errand, someone could easily have taken them without noticing. It was over lunch at Yummy's that I first learned of my children's desire to live with me. I learned that their mother was having a hard time accepting the end of our marriage. I explained that too often in life we don't think about the consequences of our actions until the damage is done. A good example is the many people who serve time for stupid things because they didn't stop and think about the opportunity in front of them. "Dad," Jean said, "is adultery the only reason you divorced Mom?" "No," I answered. "Adultery is only part of the physical evidence. To go that far, your mom had to have left the family emotionally, mentally, and spiritually before she committed that act. This is the same thing Jesus was explaining when he said, 'I will never leave you.' We lose faith and become alienated from him. Your mother had to separate herself from us and our views on family life to begin her affair. That act was the final blow to the marriage because it caused us all to lose our ability to trust her. It's not as simple as it seems, Wade said quietly. Her own appearance deceived her and ruined her. Because of the behavior of one of them, we're all going to have to accept that outcome. I sat stunned. My son had put it all together and explained it better than I ever could. He made me wonder where this wisdom came from. She willingly went from one man to another, Agnes said. She knew what she was doing. That's why I'll never forgive her. To keep the conversation going, I asked them what they would like to see in our new home. This led to an open and honest discussion. As I dropped them off on the side of the road in front of my former home, I saw Margaret looking out the window. I paid no attention to her. Once the kids got to the house and went inside, I went to my dad's house to get ready for dinner with Tammy. I would later find out that Margaret spent the entire evening in her bedroom crying. Tammy saw my old 40 Ford for the first time when I picked her up. We had a 25-minute drive to a pizza place in Marble Hills. We were both dressed casually. Peter's been on edge since he got back from his surprise trip, Tammy said. It didn't help that he found out he'd have to find a new place to live. I asked him to serve me as soon as he got off the plane. Did they ask you about his addiction to alcohol? I gave them tips more than once about where he likes to hang out, Tammy said. I dropped the name of the place you wanted. Why was that important? It's known to be a front for high-end escort services, I said. The police will know he's a client. Tammy started laughing because she thought it was funny, and when she calmed down, she said, I'd like to see the look on Margaret's face when she finds out. Bravo, Ray, well done. Everything possible is being done to kick him out of the police force and completely destroy his reputation, I said. They won't be able to convict him of anything, but they'll say the evidence forced him to resign without any references. His 20-year police career is his whole life, Tammy said. It's going to be ruined because he couldn't keep it in his pants. I like it when you don't get mad and get more than an even chance. I then told her about the day I had spent with the kids and in general terms what we had discussed. Tammy cried as I told her. You made me look at this whole mess in a way I never would have thought possible, she said. Why have I never met people with that kind of logic before? It's because our walking life has made us who we are now, I said. Before that, we probably didn't have enough life experience to develop that understanding. After digesting that remark in her mind, she moved closer to me and said, I will enjoy getting to know you much better. The pizzeria made a great impression on Tammy. She met a longtime friend of mine and his wife. Scott and Trish Tate were having dinner with their young daughter, who was just under 5 years old. It was obvious that she would soon have a little brother or sister. I was amused by the fact that she had no idea who he was. They arrived before us and invited us to join them. Tammy and Trish seemed to hit it off. Scott and I talked about the whole public mess and my plans for the future. Scott said that if I needed funds to buy out my soon-to-be ex-wife from Pig and Whistle, to let him know. He would be happy to help me out. I explained to both of them who Tammy was, and they seemed to take it calmly. I learned from him that once Peter was removed from his position, the captain would be promoted rather than looking for a replacement on the street. Scott felt that was what the city should have done in the first place. If they had done that, none of what is happening now would have happened. When Tammy heard this, she had a smile on her face that I would call a smile a mile wide. The extra-large pizza pie was amazing. Between the food and 2 pitchers of beer, we all overeat. It was Trish who suggested we get together the following Saturday night for an informal dinner and dance at the Baitia restaurant on Baitia. Tammy said it was a date. Trish, if you don't mind me asking, Tammy said, how did you meet Scott? Scott worked as an investigator for the state, Trish explained. On my 29th birthday, I tried to have him arrested. We ended up being handcuffed to each other, and 11 months later we were married. Ray can tell you our whole story later. Tammy, Trish's parents have been friends for years. We met because we're both members of the Legion, I explained. It was through them that I met Scott. How are Helen and John doing? Taking care of their grandchildren, Trish replied with a smile. Mom can't be truly happy if they aren't running after her. After learning that Tammy was a registered nurse, the ladies exchanged phone numbers. Scott and Trish paid the bill and we began to pack up for the night. As we were walking back to her house, I had to stop and finish their story. 2 weeks later, Peter Reynolds and Margaret were sitting at Dunkin' Donuts on a Sunday morning drinking coffee, trying to figure out who was trying to take him out. Starting with the tip that sent him to a hole in the wall, showing up in the back of a truck naked, robbing a pig and whistle, paying taxes on used property, finding stolen checks in a locked drawer, and now also claiming he was a client of an expensive high-end escort service, put him in a situation where he is being forced to leave. The state police and the detectives working with them now believe that it was the break-in at the Pig and Whistle that had provided the money to pay for the case. Margaret finally admitted that the piece of paper with the code to the safe had been found at the bottom of the jewelry box where she kept the jewelry. Upon hearing this, the detectives concluded that Peter could have easily discovered it when he was in her bedroom. Everyone they worked with now believed that he was deliberately using Margaret to hide his bad habits. It had gotten to the point where he wouldn't even drink alcoholic drinks. It was believed that he had been on a bender the weekend he disappeared. All of this became public knowledge. Peter suggested that Margaret's husband might be behind it all. Detectives went through interview tapes to show the look on his face when he found out about the affair. They had audio recordings of Ray's conversation with Margaret, her conversation with her husband, and the call to her parents. Everything they recorded indicated that he had no idea about their relationship. The deciding factor was that the pastor had provided him with an unbreakable alibi for the weekend in question. Raymond Burns commented brilliantly on what had been laid down by Margaret and himself. So well that there was no credibility left in him. The questions he asked led the detectives in a direction that proved to be quite pernicious. The circumstantial evidence was adding up and naturally leading to only one conspiracy. His lawsuit was going to cost the department a tidy sum. Raymond Burns was considered untouchable, innocent, just caught in the middle. Whoever's behind this, Margaret said, is aware enough of how the police think to manipulate the evidence and point it right at you. The question is, who did you piss off enough in the department? Your husband was careful, Peter said. Even if he needs something from home, he enlists the help of an attorney. That shows he's a thinking man and quite capable of doing it. The problem is that a case like this takes a team. At least 3 people to put you in the truck, Margaret said. Someone in the department stole my keys and put them back. The key to your box could have been copied the day you disappeared. The problem is, where did they get the combo for the safe with my handwriting? After all, Ray isn't evil enough to organize all this. The state even talked to the owner of the property who said he was glad Peter kept his word. Peter said, "My house will be waiting for me when I get out." You're in a situation where everything is stacked against you, Margaret said. It looks like you're going to have to resign because you've already been stripped of your powers pending the outcome of the investigation. It doesn't help that the detectives think you set them up and had them arrest my soon-to-be ex-husband. Is there anything in your past that might lend more credibility to the circumstantial evidence? The only thing I can say on the positive side is that Tammy hasn't tried to turn our children against me, Peter says. They both think I'm a bit of a vigilante for what I've done. They refuse to talk to me about their mother at all because, as they say, I gave up my right to know when I first cheated. At least you still have a relationship with yours, Margaret said. Jean Sr. said we never left you, Mother. You left us the moment your eyes went to your lover. That's why we were so hurt. We didn't notice it until it was too late to confront you. Now they are looking for a house with their father and preparing to move. Peter sat brooding, slowly coming to the realization that not only had they screwed up their relationship with their families, but now, as a couple, they had nothing but the bonds they had put on themselves. Hell, they didn't even love each other. I had a lawyer arrange to have my car delivered to my father through a third party. I traded the electric car for a used Ford Explorer, getting the difference back. This afternoon, Tammy, my 3 kids, and I set out to find a house. Tammy and I were still in the getting to know each other stage. She just came with us to be an extra set of eyes. Margaret and I, thanks to our lawyers, came to an agreement. She got the house and I got the business. The transfer of ownership had already been finalized and recorded. The city manager's attorneys reviewed my application and asked me to wait until the state investigation was completed. Dale Britton made it clear that we viewed this as a maneuver to stall for time. We found a great house with 5 acres of land. It had 4 bedrooms, all on the 2nd floor, with a huge master bedroom and double walk-in closet. A 4-bay garage with an open floor plan on the main floor. The house didn't have a basement, but you could wall off the living room to make it a safe room during a tornado. Wade liked the extra building that could be turned into a hardware store. We all agreed that the house needed to be repainted and the main floors needed to be refinished. I wanted to put laminate flooring on the entire downstairs because it was easy to care for. The rest of the house seemed modern and current to Tammy. I said I wanted to replace the upstairs lamps with downlights and recess them into the ceiling, like most of the downstairs fixtures. The price seemed high, and I suggested a much lower one. Tammy called her kids, and we all met at the Red Lobster restaurant for dinner. Tammy and I were surprised that the kids knew each other, even though their kids were a couple years older and in high school. That evening, when I took the kids to their mother's house, Tammy was with me. The next day, I learned from my children that when their mother saw us together, she was furious. Margaret angrily demanded answers to questions they didn't have because they were meeting her for the first time. She got very angry when Wade told her that what your father does doesn't concern you anymore because you decided to leave him for Mr. Reynolds. A month later, on Tuesday morning just after 9 o'clock, Peter Reynolds took one last look around his office at the police station. The state's investigation showed that, although there was no evidence of his guilt, everything pointed to him. The fact that he was intoxicated and the location where he was found made a conviction impossible. The mayor and the police captain took away his badge and gun. He was offered the choice of resigning or being fired. Either way, he would not be given any references as the evidence pointed out. He decided to resign immediately so as not to shift the blame to Margaret Burns. Whoever had prosecuted him had done it masterfully. His career was ruined because he allowed himself to turn his attention to someone else. Margaret watched Peter walk out of the police station a broken man. There were no goodbyes or good luck wishes. Everyone was glad to be rid of him. There had been too much drama over the past couple of months because of questionable behavior. Peter had been forced to leave town and there was no way he could find a job here. The incessant barrage of questions in the press guaranteed it. Margaret felt like she was losing the only friend she had left in this world. Most of the people she and her husband interacted with on a regular basis didn't talk to her. Even her children were busy packing, preparing for moving day at their father's new home. The house she thought was too small was proving to be too big for her alone. It saddened her to realize how unimportant it had now become. Although her relationship with her children was slowly mending, she realized that the trust and love they had once felt for her had changed forever. Peter and she searched but never learned anything about Tammy and Ray's relationship. All they could prove was that they were seeing each other. It wasn't until after that horrible weekend that everyone's world was shattered. Raymond was on his usual behavior, keeping everything to himself and refusing to talk about anything but the kids. He and the kids had spent the weekend picking out furniture for their bedrooms. From what she had seen of the new house he had bought, it was bigger than their house and had more land. He asked permission to move all the equipment out of the store that Saturday and asked that she not be around when he did. As his lawyer had said, she was his past and he wanted to put her in the past forever. Margaret was just leaving the police station when she saw Tammy standing there looking at her gleefully. The 12 o'clock news was broadcasting the news that her ex-husband would be retiring soon. Peter broke, you see. It was clearly spelled out in the contract because my father is a lawyer and drew it up, Tammy said. If either of us fornicated, we lost everything we put into the marriage except the original value of my trust. It's sad because he can't even afford a whore like you. Do you know who killed him? Margaret asked. Yes, that's right, said Tammy, grinning widely. They say all dogs go back to their vomit. Peter did, and it got him down. Margaret realized what Tammy meant and lost her temper. She pounced on her with pure hatred, intending to kill the bitch. Tammy was ready and fought back. The staff that arrived had to come out and separate them. Both ladies got black eyes that would be hard to cover up with makeup. They separated them and advised Tammy to leave to let both ladies calm down. My daughter Tammy called me and told me what had happened. Her mother had taken the rest of the week off to help me clean up the house I would be moving into tomorrow, as the contractors were finishing cleaning today. I got a 10-year mortgage at 3.5% interest thanks to being able to make a huge down payment from my corporation's retained earnings. All night I made ice packs to reduce the swelling. Tamara thought it was funny that two middle-aged women were acting like immature children over a man. Ray, she asked while her mother showered, are you feeling better now? I think your mom and I have been helping each other, I said, to ease the pain. We're still in the friend stage, but we were both interested to see where it would lead, but not to push each other. Mom is grateful to you for helping her through all of this, Tamara said. She said you were the one who helped her realize that her marriage was over before the affair even started. I'm still trying to figure out how that's possible. In order to have an affair, a person had to emotionally detach from the partner they were with, I said. Instead of working on the relationship, they had already decided they wanted a new person. The affair happened because they decided the marriage was dead. We were still discussing the issue when Tammy sat down next to me and said, I knew there was a problem, Tamara, even before we moved here. I thought the move would give us a fresh start. I was wrong. It takes two people to make a relationship work, and they both have to give 110%. I did, but your father didn't. Ray could say the same thing about Margaret. The minute your partner stops doing that, your relationship is jeopardized. Mom, Ray, I have a boyfriend who is starting a serious relationship, she said. Do you think I should discuss this with him? We both said yes. 3 weeks later, Judge MacDonald lowered the gavel, ending Margaret and I's marriage. I was granted primary custody of our 3 children according to their wishes. Margaret had unlimited access. The mayor, given Margaret's connection to Peter, placed her on probation for 1 year. The terms we'd agreed to were approved by him. Margaret and I went outside and sat on a bench because it was time to air out the room. I lost track of who and what I was once Peter came back into my life, Margaret said. I want you to know that. I realize now that I, like him, had unresolved issues that I had forgotten about. Don't blame yourself for all this. It's all Peter's doing and mine. Thank you for that, I said. It answers a lot of questions. I'm offering you a civil relationship and nothing more. I won't even call you friend. Outside of our children's lives, we will stay away from each other because it will take me a long time before I can forgive you. That's more than I expected, she said. Our pastor advised me to find a new church because a lot of people don't want to forget what happened. So I started looking. As for our children, whenever we agree on anything, I ask them to coordinate it with you so it doesn't conflict with your plans. When she got up and left, I had to fight myself not to say stop, let's try again, even though I knew I didn't love her anymore. It took me a few minutes to realize that it takes time to break away from the familiar. Thankfully, the relationship Tammy and I were building would allow us to move past our shared past. Margaret would never know that the greatest gift she ever gave me was in the last few moments. With her words, she gave me the freedom to move forward. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and watch for the next video.